time to talk about an old man in anime. Well, an old man in anime who is a mentor to the main character. And surprisingly doesn't die. Yeah. So these next two videos for this one and the next one are going to be about the Yakuza in Wano. This first one will be about Hyougoro of the Flower, as in the leader of the Yakuza, the main one that was the boss in the Flower capital. And then the next video will be about the other four Yakuza leaders that we are introduced to that they all respect Hyougoro and they all kind of serve under him to a degree. They see him as their boss. So I'll be talking about them in the next video. In regards to the rest of this, as I said, this is just going to be about Hyougoro. They will get mentioned in this video, but I'll do a bit more, in-depth things about them in the next one, because there's some stuff that, they're there for that Hyougoro is not there for. Also, I just like their designs, so, I just wanted to talk about them anyway. And then after we are done with the Yakuza section, then I'll be moving on to, oh god, the scabbards. They are in this, I'm going to talk about the scabbards because they do hold leadership roles within Wano. And I've already talked about Inuarashi and Nekomamushi, and I talked about, Kanjuro when I was doing the Kurozumi. So yeah, I wanted to talk about the rest of the scabbards and Shinobu before I finish up with, the future of Wano with Momonosuke and Tama and Toko and Hiyori, with all of them as this representations of the futures of Wano, the bright hope that is there for the country of Wano. So going in to talk about Hyougoro, he was the most famous Yakuza in Wano during the Kozuki family's reign, hence why he has so much respect given to him by the younger Yakuza. Yes, Denjiro as Kirishiro does end up becoming a Yakuza boss, and I will talk about that when I talk about Kirishiro, when I talk about Denjiro, but, Hyougoro even has, even more acclaim than that. And he was the Yakuza boss that was in the Flower Capital, so there's that. He is 70 years old, which makes him a little bit younger than Sukeyaki. And, so he, he was there for pretty much everything that happened with Odin. He watched Odin grow up and everything, and they were friends. And he also, his wife, we finally got a name for his wife very recently. I think it was in an SBS or in a Viver card data book. I'm not sure, but we got information about her recently at the very least. Her name is Taka. So we finally have her name, and I just like her anyway. She's cute. She's just, I love the standard of the adorable little old lady or the adorable normal sized wife and the frickin' giant husband, because way back in his heyday, Hyougoro was much, much bigger. And we get kind of remnants of that popping up when we get to Onigashima with the Ice Oni virus running around and it affecting Hyougoro. So, going into Hyougoro's history, his life, he was born 70 years ago in Wano, and that probably would have still been under the reign of Sukeyaki's father, Odin's grandfather, but we don't know who that was. Whatever Kozuki family member that was. And then, during the reign, he became the most famous Yakuza boss in Wano. And he allied himself with the Kozuki's with the family, mostly because of Odin. But Hyougoro also just one of the things that they do show in Wano, and I'll talk about this a bit more when it comes to some of the other Yakuza, is that the more honorable kind that they are trying to represent in Wano are not the ones that were under Orochi later on, but the ones that Hyougoro were and Hyougoro was and is going to hopefully try to turn Wano back into for their Yakuza. Were respected. Yes, they were thugs and they were a bit more on the violent side, but they were considered much more respected in that regard. And they would protect you against gangs and things like that. Stuff that the capital or that the people in charge, whatever the Wano version of the police are. I don't remember if we ever end up getting like a version of like what the Wano police or sheriffs are. I guess the closest things would be like the Oni Wabanchu and the Mimawari Gumi, but those are all at the behest of Orochi, so I don't know, but there's like officials like go around and stuff like that, the magistrates and stuff like that. But like they can help protect you from like corrupt officials and different things like that. The Yakuza would do that, which became much more prevalent under Orochi than anything because they were just willing to, suck up to Orochi in that regard. And Hyougoro became like the boss of them, the boss in the flower capital, and had all the rest of the Yakuza. They all very much respected him, for the most part. There were a couple of them that didn't. One of them we find out later on during the Mountain God incident. He's kind of the cause of the Mountain God incident in the long run. He was trying to mess up Hyougoro, and I'll mention him in the other video, but I don't even remember his name because he doesn't actually appear in the show. Doesn't appear in the manga or the anime. He's just a side character that just gets mentioned and Oda had sketch art of. Hyougoro does eventually befriend Odin, and he was a fan of his since childhood. So there's there is that mutual respect there that Hyougoro and Odin have for each other. When Odin was 15, Hyougoro and his Yakuza family were dragged into the Harem Revolt incident. And then 41 years ago, his subordinates informed him about Kinemon. This is when Kinemon got his hands on... so Kinemon made the stupid mistake of borrowing money from the wrong people. That's another thing that the Yakuza would do, is they would lend you money, and then you're expected to pay it back. And if you couldn't pay it back, then they found other ways of making you pay for it so they could get their money back. Very similar to the way that like the mafia tends to work in movies and in TV shows and stuff like that. It's that same type of thing. It's just a more Japanese version of it instead of like the Italian version of it, or what other variation of, mafias that there are out there. Some are more respectful, some are less respectful. It just depends on who you're talking to and what medium they're being presented in, and whether or not they're the heroes or the bad guys. And in this case, the Yakuza, for at least this parts, are kind of the good guys, because we meet Hyougoro and then we learn more about his backstory, which is kind of the way that works in One Piece a lot. So what ends up happening is that Kinemon borrows money from them, and then he ends up getting chased after, and he steals money from them, which is stupid. And then eventually Hyougoro simply just told his men that they would not stand a chance against Kinemon in a one-on-one fight, which is probably true, because even back then Kinemon was fairly strong. Then later there's the Mountain God incident that happens, and Hyougoro witnesses this in regards to Odin defeating the Mountain God. And saving all the people that were inside of it. Of course, Odin took responsibility for this, and he was impressed by Odin's feat, but it's still, Odin's still, exiled. We don't hear that much else about Hyougoro in this, interim time frame between when Odin is exiled just after the Mountain God incident, all the way up until when Orochi is in control, and it's a little bit before the 20-year time skip. We don't really see anything else about Hyougoro. Supposedly he's still there in the background. He's still running the Yakuza. He's still, trying to protect people from Orochi and his, conniving schemes and everything as best he can. But he's strong enough and such, and then Kaido shows up and everything, so there's all of those problems that Hyougoro is trying to deal with at the same time. And eventually we do have it that, Odin shows up and he's visiting Hyougoro and Taka. And, they go and they're talking, and, like, he's getting advice. Hyougoro and Taka are giving Odin advice and everything for, this is after Odin's been dancing in the Flowers Capital naked for several years and everything, and is, he's talking with them and everything else, and just getting other information here and there about, just things that are going on in Wano. And then we have it that Orochi makes this, stupid mistake of going after Hyougoro. He captures Hyougoro, and unfortunately Taka is killed during this incident. And this just enrages Odin. Hyougoro is handed over to the Beast Pirates, where he is eventually imprisoned in the Udon prison mines. And of course, this is the inciting incident that leads to when Odin and the 9 Red Scabbards go and try to fight against Kaido and Orochi's forces, where they go and try to fight them. And what we see here, we just see how much, like, Odin's main people that he cares about, like, yes, he cares about the people of Wano, obviously, he does. And he's cared about them all his life, it's just sometimes he's not as good at showing his affection for them in the most proper ways. And he eventually grows, obviously. That's everything that happens when he's traveling around and he becomes the daimyo and everything. But one of the things that we see with this is that some of the people, Hyougoro and Taka, along with Toki and his children and the Scabbards, are the ones who mean the most to him, that are within the borders of Wano. Yes, he still very much cares about Whitebeard and all of his crew, and Roger and all of his crew and everything. He still cares about them. And he still misses all of his friends that he made while he was on the outside of Wano. But, like, for the people that he has around him in Wano, and, like, Toki can't really defend herself. Momo and Hiyori are children. Taka is an old woman. And yes, she has Hyougoro, but Hyougoro was somehow overpowered by Orochi's forces and Kaido's forces. And they probably used his wife against him, and then they dragged him off to the Udon mines. And then we cut ahead 20 years. And supposedly at some point in time, during this time frame, or between when Hyougoro was captured and when Luffy shows up in the Udon prison mines, lots of other people have come into the mine because of stuff they did against Orochi or stuff they did against Kaido or whatever. And, like, they themselves end up probably telling Hyougoro about the prophecy, about Toki's prophecy. So he probably hears about it, and even, we see that he has turned into the little old man by the time we see him during the actual Wano arc, before we see him in the flashback. We see him as, like, the little old man who is having a hard time working in this environment because, like, you have to carry all the blocks, and the blocks are freaking huge, and you only get 1 Dongo coupon per block, so you have to carry so many blocks in order to get so many coupons in order to even get a decent amount of Dongo for you to be able to eat. And we see that this system is just very unfair. It's designed by Orochi and Kaido and Queen, mostly Queen in this regard, because he's the one that's in charge of the Udon prison. And, we just see how much, how horribly all the prisoners are treated and everything. And we see that they themselves, that the prisoners still respect Hyougoro because a lot of them remember who he is. And we even have it that during the same time frame when we're kind of being introduced to Hyougoro, we have Shinobu, Nami, and Robin are having the bathhouse scenes, and it's the tried and true method of have naked, sexy women discussing something, and people will pay attention. Hey, it worked. Game of Thrones proved that. Have a naked, sexy woman telling you something. Yes, I'm paying attention. Please keep talking. It's just the way that works. And One Piece pulls it off. Other anime and manga pull off the same thing. Well, they're naked, so I guess they don't have a whole lot to pull off without getting a different content rating. But what ends up happening is we have, Shinobu was kind of telling, Nami and Robin about Hyougoro. And they're like, oh, if he's still alive, he would be a great asset to us because of how respected he was. And, like, we kind of get, like, this flash of what Hyougoro used to look like. How, big and strong and everything. How much of a presence that he used to have. I think I looked it up, and while Hyougoro definitely has observation and armament haki, I do not believe that he has Conqueror's haki. We know Odin did, but I don't believe Hyougoro did. Although that wouldn't have surprised me if he did or not, but that may have been something that's been updated since then, but I don't think so. And what ends up happening is, in the prison mines, what ends up happening is, Hyougoro was trying to eat his dongo and that didn't work, and he's just, so he gets punched by a guard and he's found lying on the ground, and that makes Dobon, who's the deputy warden of the prisons, starts attacking Hyougoro, and then that leads to when Luffy and Kid go over and they basically beat up Dobon from the inside. And then then Luffy carries Hyougoro off, carries him off on the shoulder. Because, like, Luffy is Luffy, and, like, he's not gonna like the idea of, like, watching an old man get beat up. Luffy's not that. Now, it's one thing if the old man picked the fight himself, in Luffy's opinion, but, like, this is a old man who was just trying to eat his food, and then Dobon just started beating him up. So Luffy's not gonna take that lying down, so he saves Dobon. Kid technically helps, but Kid's just more doing it because he's angry at being in the prison. To be fair, I'd be angry if I was unjustly put in prison too. But then again, Kid has killed a lot of people, so take your pick. Technically, Luffy probably has too, but. And what ends up happening is we get to the next day, and Hyougoro is thanking Luffy for saving him, and then Luffy, because because Luffy always has this mindset about food. That's one of the main important things to Luffy is, of course, food. So what ends up happening is he gives, because Luffy has so many of the meal tickets for the Dango, he just gives a bunch of them to Hyougoro, so that way Hyougoro is able to go and actually get food. And we have this moment where Hyougoro goes and he gets the dongos and he's, trying to start eating them, and then he gets attacked by Daifugo, who's the scorpion smile, I believe. I actually really like his design. He gets attacked by Hyougoro gets attacked by Daifugo, because he's like, oh, you couldn't have earned that many dongo. How could you even have that amount of food? And we have some great quotes from Hyougoro that we end up getting here, because Hyougoro, in regards to, like, his chivalry, he's like, even if I die, I will never speak, damn youngster, carrying out personal honor, helping the weak, and never yielding yielding to strong fools. If I don't reciprocate that man's chivalry with chivalry, I can never show my face again. And this is happening while Daifugo is stepping on Hyougoro, because he's knocked Hyougoro to the ground. He's knocked all the dongo on the ground in front of Hyougoro, and Hyougoro ends up, like, trying to scoop the dongos into his mouth so he can actually eat them. And when I was going through and getting pictures for this, I kind of forgot about this moment. Not entirely. I remembered bits of it, but I'd missed that. It was like, yeah, it's just like Daifugo is just, like, beating on Hyougoro, while Hyougoro is trying to eat the food that is on the ground, that is now disgusting food on the ground, because he's so hungry. And he doesn't want to waste the gift, the kindness that Luffy gave him. And he's like, go ahead and kill me. Meeting him has brought back nostalgic feelings. A long time since Hyougoro of the Flowers had his belly and heart filled. This is the samurai country. In the past, there were many men like that. You bastards have massacred them all. And this is, of course, still like, this is Hyougoro's opinions about Luffy after barely interacting with him. This is after Hyougoro has been saved by Luffy once and then given meal tickets to get food. And that just shows how much Hyougoro has had to suffer in this prison camp for the last 20 years. And, like, his wife is dead, and this is what's been going on. He knows Odin's dead. He thinks a bunch of the scabbards are dead at this point in time, because that's what most of the country thinks. Orochi is still in control. Kaido is still in control. And Hyougoro is given this glimpse of, like, this someone who is decent. And yes, we as the audience know how selfish Luffy can be when it comes to food. But those are in situations where he knows there's plenty of food to go around. It's like, and he's also been introduced to Tama within, shortly before all of this happens, before he meets Hyougoro. He sees how much Tama and, it's Sukeyaki, but Tengu Yamahitetsu at that point in time. He's seen how little food they have, and he sees how much it pains Tama and the others and everything like that to have to eat the poisoned food and drink poisoned water and different things like that, and how many problems that have been going on in Wano because of the lack of food that is clean food and pure food for them to be able to eat. And, like, he's seen, like, what happens at the Paradise Farm and everything else like that. So it's like Luffy has already seen what's been going on in Wano, so he is okay with sharing his meal tickets. He's like, I'm strong. Yeah, I've got the cuffs on me, but I'm just getting stronger here lifting stuff. I can get plenty of Dongo. This old guy needs Dongo, so he gives him the Dong. He gives him the stuff for the Dongo, and I love that. That's one of the good things about Luffy, because, like, he does not like the idea of people starving. He despises that idea. And it does kind of go along with the habit of, like, well, some girl bought him lunch, so you better make sure you're a good king in their country. Because that's what happens with Tama. Technically, that happens with Shirahoshi. Vivi does technically feed Luffy at one point in time. That happens with Rebecca. Nami feeds Luffy the first time she meets him in the manga. So it's like that whole concept of, like, well, someone gave him food, so you better make sure you're a good ruler of your kingdom or your town or something like that. Because if not, Luffy's gonna sick you out and end you very quickly. To be fair, in Shirahoshi's case, she gave him food, but her father is not cruel, but then he helped save her from Hody, so that's different there. But that kind of just stays in there, and, like, Daifugu is, like, trying to kill Hyougoro, and then Luffy steps in, he attacks the guard, knocks him away, and saves Hyougoro. Then they're caught and then brought before Queen, because Queen has now showed up at the Udon prison, and we have it that Luffy and Hyougoro are brought before Queen, and Queen's, like, mocking them and everything. He's being mocks Hyougoro for being a weak old man. He couldn't even protect himself. He couldn't even fight back and everything. And Hyougoro begs Queen to spare Luffy. Now, Queen is pretty much aware of who Luffy is at this point in time, and Queen's aware of who Hyougoro is, I believe, at this point in time. So he decides to sentence them to fight in a death match called the Sumo Inferno, which is, of course, where they set up this ring in part of the Udon prison mines. We never get, like, a full scale thing for, like, how big this place is, but it's pretty dang big. For just, like, the one area where Luffy and his group are, and then there's the other 4 sections of the Udon prison mine. So this place is pretty dang big. And what ends up happening is... Hi, baby. And what ends up happening is they set up this, there's a sumo ring set up in there, and there's stuff buried in the ground that's supposed to act as, like, sensory devices for the collars. And Queen explains it, like, I'm going to put these collars on you, and they're very similar to the types of collars that the Celestial Dragons use on their slaves, where if they go out of bounds or they go, a certain distance away or whatever, they will explode. And in this case, the collars activate, and they are designed to chop your head off, basically. And Queen demonstrates this on like a slab of stone or whatever, and it just blows up. It destroys it. So it's like, yeah, that's going to go on your neck. You can use your devil fruit powers now because there's no sea prism stone in it, but you can't leave the circle without risking getting your head sliced off. So that's what ends up happening. And Luffy is like, okay. you know, um, you know, Luffy's fine with this to a degree. Like, he obviously doesn't like the idea of having the collar on him, but at least now he doesn't have the sea prism cuffs on him anymore. And him and Hyougoro are stuck in the ring. And Queen then proceeds to send in various opponents for them to fight. Luffy knocks out the first batch pretty quickly, just pretty instantly because of his, Conqueror's Haki. Just, they're down. And then, Luffy then ends up mentioning Silver's Rayleigh, which confuses Hyougoro or puzzles him a little bit because I'm sure at some point in time during one of their various meetings, that implies that Oden may have mentioned some of his adventures to Hyougoro. And to be fair, I would have asked if I was in Hyorogoro's shoes. I would be like, hey, Oden, tell me about your adventures outside of Wano. I would like to hear about all of these people that you met and where you were for the past, 8.5, 9 years. I would please like to know. Please tell me. Type of thing. And so Hyougoro and Oden probably talked a lot about that, and he probably talked about Roger and talked about Rayleigh and everything. So that's kind of implied there. What then ends up happening is we have this kind of subsequent sequence of events where Queen just keeps sending in more and more opponents. One of them is like Alpaca Man and Armadillo Man sends them in. And Hyougoro watches as Luffy is just able to easily predict their attacks and dodge them and knock them out and everything. So that doesn't really do too much. But Luffy keeps getting frustrated because Luffy's already got his future sight Haki at this point in time from dealing with Katakuri and everything, and he's kind of training that up a bit more here. And he already fought against Kaido once, and he didn't do anything against Kaido. Maybe he gave Kaido a very mild headache. That's probably about all that Luffy did at that point in time in the battle when he first fought Kaido. Not a lot. And Kaido was just really drunk then, so Kaido probably didn't even notice. He just drank more, the headache went away. So that wasn't really something there. And Luffy's like, okay, I gotta practice. I gotta get better at this. And he keeps, Hyorogoro is talking with Luffy as Luffy keeps mentioning, no, I didn't do that right. No, I didn't do that right either. And Luffy is talking to Hyorogoro, and Luffy is like, well, Rayleigh did it like this, and Rayleigh could do this, and I can't figure it out. And what Luffy is referring back to is kind of the more advanced armament Haki technique that Rayleigh had demonstrated to him when they were on Ruskaina. And that he had demonstrated when he had been able to disarm the collar that was on Kimi when they were on Sabaody in the auction house. So Luffy is kind of trying to figure that out. He's trying to figure out okay, I've got the basics of armament Haki down and layering of armament Haki and everything and using it with my devil fruit, but I just can't figure out how to do this advanced part or do this next step. And he's talking about Haki, and Hyorogoro's sitting there what do you mean you're talking about what is Haki? Because Haki isn't the term that they use for that type of ability in Wano. So Hyorogoro's a little bit confused by this, and Luffy eventually kind of demonstrates something, and then Hyorogoro kind of clicks what it is, and then Hyorogoro manages to he's like, oh, he figures out what Luffy's trying to do, and Hyorogoro activates his own advanced armament Haki, and he is just then able to punch out and defeat Alpaca Man pretty easily. And Luffy's like, that's it. That's what I was trying to figure out. It's using adding aura on top of it, and Luffy hadn't figured that out yet, and Hyorogoro was able to be oh, what you're talking about is what we call Riwo. And the flowing Sakura and everything. And so it's this leads to pretty much several of the next fights that Luffy and Hyorogoro have against their opponents. Luffy just keeps trying to do it again and again, and it's not quite working the right way. Hyougoro keeps trying to demonstrate it and tell him and everything. Luffy ends up eventually just having Hyougoro on his back to, like, hold him there, and Hyougoro can just, like, tell him what to do in his ear, which is cute, because it's very giving off vibes of Luke training on Dagobah with Yoda kind of on his back. It's very giving off those very good vibes there, with, you know, kid being trained by old man on his back. So it's like that type of a thing. And so it's like they keep training and everything, and eventually they're just exhausted. Luffy has maybe gotten a little bit, but he's not making much progress, with, you know, very little to none. And what ends up happening is, like, they're just exhausted and they end up falling asleep. Everybody else falls asleep. And Luffy then, Hyougoro and Luffy are talking, and Hyougoro asks him why he wants to defeat Kaido. And in the process, this is when Raizo shows up with Caribou helping him. Pops out of Caribou, which is just not a place I want to be in. But you have the creepy mud guy, sure, why the heck? Why not use him in this case? It might help make him useful. Which they do. And basically what ends up happening is, of course, Hyougoro is surprised to see Raizo there and find out that Luffy has a connection to the Scabbards and to Momonosuke, and finding out that Momonosuke is alive, which finding out that Momonosuke was alive just, like, renews Hyogoro's his will to live, and he requests to join the alliance to topple Kaido and Orochi. He also reveals that they have other potential allies within the prison, and this is referring to the other Yakuza members. So what then ends up happening is that, you know, during that night, they steal the giant thing of Oshiruko and bring it over. Raizo and Caribou stole, like, the giant pot of Oshiruko and brought it over, and, like, they give it to Luffy and Hyougoro to eat because they are both so hungry, and they just scarf that down. The next day, the Beast Pirates are all gathering again to watch more of this, and Luffy and Hyougoro are just sitting there very fat, with, like, they're just stuffed with Oshiruko, and they're just, like, pretending that they weren't the ones that ate it, which is just funny. And this leads into when Queen turns on, like, the projector for the picture Tanishi, the pond snail setup that they're doing, where they're going to then be able to watch the broadcast of Yasuie's execution. And this then leads into Hyougoro and Luffy are watching this as well. They're still trapped in the pit, in the ring. They still can't leave because they still have the collars on them. And what ends up happening is they're watching as this execution is going to be carried out. And what ends up happening is, you know, after Yasuie's afro is revealed, Hyougoro recognizes him. He recognizes who that was because, you know, he recognizes this is Yasuie the Hedgehog, the former daimyo of the Hakumai region. And Hyougoro is just like, because it's like, it's one of these moments where he's like, this link back to the Kozukis is still there. This link to the rightful rulers of Wano is there because, Yasuie was a friend of Odin's as well. And him and Hyougoro may have gotten along at various points in time. They may have known each other. They probably did. But what ends up happening is, we see a bunch of the people, like, showing up that are the people that are infected with the smiles showing up and just, like, laughing at Yasuie's execution. And, so they're watching this as the execution is happening, and they see a whole bunch of the people that are laughing. And Luffy's like, there shouldn't be laughing at a man's execution. And then Hyougoro and this is kind of lining up for, like, Hyougoro is explaining this to Luffy as, Hiyori is explaining it to Zoro for, like, how the smiles work, for how the defective smiles were handed out and used to basically turn a ton of the very poor, very hungry citizens into permanently smiling, all defective smile users. And so he's explaining they're not laughing because they find it funny. They're laughing because it's the only thing that they can do. All they can do is smile and laugh, and that's the only way they can cry, is to laugh so hard that they cry. Because they can't express any other type of emotion. Which Luffy's like, oh, well, that's bad. Yes, it is. And while all of this is going on, Killer, Kid and Killer are brought in because Kid escaped and then he got brought back. And Killer is with him as Kamazo, and they reveal that and everything. And then, of course, they're put into the big dunk tank. And, well, this is all going on. Like, they're watching as, like, the execution is being carried out on screen. And the execution goes through. And, Luffy's crew then show up because Toko is there and she's going to be attacked, and that's when Luffy's crew show up and they're able to help protect Toko, and they're able to help get Hyougoro's body out of there and all this stuff and like Hyougoro's kind of watching this on screen. It's like Luffy's crew are doing some like pretty good feats in order to fight back against Orochi's forces and everything. And then sometime afterwards is when Big Mom attacks the prison, when she has been brought there by Tama and Chopper and, you know, all of them. And she's, you know, brought into the prison, or breaks into the prison, and just starts going on her rampage. And she's trying to get the Oshiruko, and there is no more Oshiruko because, of course, Luffy and Hyougoro ate it all. To be fair, they were hungry. But she's running around, and there's always this question of like, well, if the Oshiruko had been there, if there had at least been some, things may have gone a little bit different, maybe. But like, Luffy knows exactly who she is, as do all the Beast Pirates. Hyougoro has absolutely no idea who this giant freaking woman is with, you know, a pink dress and everything. He has no idea who this is. But like, Luffy's explaining, she's Big Mom, she's one of the Yonko, and he's like, oh. He's like, she's like Kaido. She's like as strong as Kaido. And he's like, oh, that's not good. And like, he watches as like Big Mom overpowers Queen and just like spins him around and eventually, you know, knocks him away. And then of course, Luffy unwillingly admits that him and Hyougoro were the ones that ate the Oshiruko. And this leads to Big Mom then directing her attack toward Luffy and pushing him and Hyougoro out of the ring. And this all lines up with Luffy is that, like, he has to try. He has to try to break the collars off, because if he doesn't, then, well, they're both going to lose their heads. Brenda has left the room. So Luffy then basically is crunch time, and he has to activate the armament haki at the right point to remove both Hyougoro's collar first. You know, he saves Hyougoro first, and then he removes his own. And he is able to do that. So he's able to do that. And then what ends up happening is... oh, God. So there's several things that happen. So Luffy is able to disarm the collars. And that's good. So they're both free of the collars. And now they can leave the ring. Which is good because they were knocked out of the ring. And then Big Mom is still now chasing after them. And Hyougoro, in an attempt to basically push Luffy, stands in front of Big Mom, right in her way, and she's about to attack him. Luffy, of course, then jumps in front of Hyougoro, trying to, you know, activate the armament haki again in order to try to block her. Doesn't work. They both get flung into a wall. And it's just like, yeah, you did that. We got flung into the wall. That's not good. And then they're able to get out of the wall. There was a point in time, at one point in time in this, there is a moment where, not in this part, but earlier, when Queen first showed up in the prison, there was a moment where, Luffy and Hyougoro just like, well, we're just going to try to get out of here, because, like, Raizo had shown up and he was trying to get the keys and everything for them, so they can escape. And Luffy was just like, well, I'm just gonna climb the wall, and he has Hyougoro on his back, and he's climbing the wall, which is just funny. And then after that is when they're brought to Queen, but I wanted to add that in there because that's just kind of funny there. So yeah, Luffy and Hyougoro get thrown into the wall. They both end up being okay, a little bloody and bruised, but okay. And this then, of course, leads into, it didn't go the way that Hyougoro had intended it to. But like Luffy apologizes to Hyougoro because he as he's pulling him out of the wall, and Hyorogoro's like, well, I used Haki just in case, and Luffy's of course you did, and he's trying to get Luffy to use his advanced armament Haki again, trying to get it to work better. And this leads to basically Big Mom chasing Luffy and Hyougoro, mostly Luffy, around the prison mine. And, like, just bashing in all of the different walls around the prison mine. Which is just funny. They turn a giant circle at least once, if not twice, through the prison mines. And then eventually Queen is able to then subdue Big Mom and then takes her away. And they leave Babanuki in charge, and of course this results in when Babanuki is using the plague bullets, but this also results when Kawamatsu is freed by Raizo, and Kiku and Chopper show up. So we have like the great the scene where like it's Raizo and Kawamatsu and Kiku and Hyougoro and Chopper and Luffy all getting ready to fight. And like it's this like moment where it's like everybody's like, oh, is that person? And is that, well, who's that? In regards to Chopper and Luffy, is that a Tanuki? Who's he? It was like, yeah, but it was like all these young famous faces showing up. And they are, they're fighting against Kaido's forces that are there, the Beast Pirates forces that are there. And this then eventually leads into where Babanuki uses the plague bullets, the mummy virus bullets. And of course infecting the prisoners, and then eventually this leads to Luffy being infected as well, and then like swaying the prisoners to their side, and then Luffy defeats Babanuki. And at some point in time, like Hyougoro did get attacked at some point in time in this, but he ends up being okay, thankfully. And then they're able to take over the prisons because they have Tama with them, and she uses her Kibi Dongos to then, tame the other beast pirates that are there, which is, Babanuki and Daifugo and Solitaire and a bunch of the other ones that are there. She tames all of them. So now she's on their side, and I just imagine Hyougoro just sitting back there, like watching this little girl with purple hair just go, here you go, and just like taming all of the different smile users. That's just funny. Just taming them. That's just funny. And this then leads into, of course, Hyougoro, sees Momonosuke, and he sees Momonosuke give, like, his speech to the other prisoners there, and, Hyougoro is putting his forces, his approval behind Momonosuke, and Luffy is, of course, treated by Chopper for the infection and everything, and all the rest of the prisoners are all taken care of. And, Hyougoro is very proud about, like, how much trust Luffy has gained among the prisoners because of what he was doing. And then they get, then the other Yakuza members show up. The four that were in, four of the surrounding areas around the four regions around the Flower Capital. They all show up. Because they were freed from their imprisons, and they're there to, pay their respects to Boss Hyougoro. And they don't like how Luffy is talking to Hyougoro so casually, because he keeps calling him, like, Grandpa Hyo or Old Man Hyo, and they don't like that, so they keep trying to threaten Luffy. And then Hyougoro just has to, like, vouch for Luffy, so he's like, it's okay for him to do it, it's okay. And they're like, fine. You make your too disrespectful to him, and we'll punish you again. So that's just kind of funny. And then we have it that over, like, so there's the 2-week time frame in here between when they're able to take over the Udon prison and when the raid on Onigashima is going to happen during the Fire Festival. So what ends up happening is, of course, they have the prison mine, so they can basically use the prison mine for whatever they need because they have Babanuki under their control because of Tama. And, of course, Tama is on the Straw Hat side. So what ends up happening is Luffy basically is kind of training there for a while, trying to get his armament hockey better and everything, and getting it, into the more advanced areas and everything. And Hyougoro is supervising this as Luffy trains. And eventually this, of course, leads into when they all have to kind of go off to their own little areas. The other Yakuza leaders all go to, like, their areas to help get their recruits all gathered up and everything and get those supplies. And, of course, they're getting all of the ships ready and everything. So there's, doing all of that stuff. And, gathering all of this getting all of their supplies and everything ready, all of their swords and other weapons and everything else ready, making sure that they've got, the ships ready and supplies and anything else that they're going to need ready. And, of course, they got the message from Yasuie that they got correct in what Yasuie was going for, but not quite correct as to what Kinemon thought it would be. So then we get to the day at the Fire Festival, and they had gathered at Habu Port for the, to then head out and join the Scabbards at the Tokage Port on a fleet of ships. So that's part of that. And, Hyougoro is part of that group along with the rest of the Yakuza members. And then, Hyougoro watches when Jinbei arrives. And then, Hyougoro joins Law of the Scabbards and the Polar Tang because he volunteers to then lead the group of samurai. And I kind of want to know what Law thinks of Hyougoro because, technically, Kid kind of interacted with him a little bit. Not a lot, but a little bit. And, Law gets to interact with him a little bit. Luffy interacted with him the most, but it's so that's type of a funny bit there. Brenda is back. She's right over here. So they're in the Polar Tang. Eventually, they all end up arriving at the gates of the Torii gates in order to get into Kaido's palace on Onigashima. And, of course, all of them, Hyougoro and the others all end up in the Beast Pirate disguises because of Kinemon's Devil Fruit, so he does that. They're all, part of that disguise, and they all head in. And Hyougoro joined Denjiro with the southern forces going around, and then they split off, and then Hyougoro, along with the other Yakuza members and a bunch of the other rebels, then infiltrate the performance stage in the Skull Dome, where they then see where Momonosuke is, tied to the crucifix and everything. And they wait patiently for their time to strike. And, they're just all waiting in the crowd. There's, the same thing is going on with, Robin and Jinbei and everything are, waiting in the crowd. Waiting for, the signal to come and everything. And what ends up happening is, of course, then Kaido disposes of Orochi and announces the new Onigashima project, and Hyougoro is just disgusted by this concept and, disgusted by the Oniwamanchu and the Mimawari Gumi just, instantly pledging their allegiance to Kaido. It's their loyalty means nothing. Their loyalty is based off of fear, as opposed to when the Kozukis, it was based off of, the respect that the Kozukis had earned, not because of fear and hatred and everything. So he's just disgusted by that. And then they have it that the Scabbards show up and they launch their attack at Kaido, and they're able to, they knock Kaido into the ground, and then eventually they go up. Kaido and the Scabbards are fighting on the top of the Skull Dome. And Hyougoro is, witnesses this, and then he sees the Yakuza members decide to go after the Tobiropo, which, no offense, I'm not saying the members aren't strong. It's just, I don't think they could necessarily handle the Tobiropo. Maybe page 1. maybe they could have taken down Page 1. But I think the other Tobiropo may have been a bit too much for them to handle. But despite the number of enemies, they end up Hyougoro's like, I can't imagine the Alliance losing. And then of course, he sees other various points of the battle and everything. He comments that like Luffy turning into Gear 4th looks like the Wisdom King. And then of course we have it that Queen unleashes the Oni virus. And what ends up happening is that both Amasa, who is one of the other Yakuza leaders, and Hyougoro both end up getting infected with the Oni virus when all of this is going on. And of course they're having to fight against not only just Kaido's forces in general, they're then having to deal with the Oni virus activating, which is then making their own comrades turn against them, and they're having to deal with all of this other stuff that's going on at the same time. And, when Chopper had been working on starting the antidote for the the Ice Oni virus, the Yakuza bosses all volunteered to help them because they've already kind of seen what Chopper can do against Queen's viruses because of what Chopper did against the Mummy virus at Udon. So they're like, oh yeah, we'll watch the Tanuki. We'll guard him. And yeah, eventually, both Yasuie, or not Yasuie, earlier that's going on. But what ends up happening is, eventually Hyougoro and Amasa are, as I said, they're infected. And Hyougoro being infected results in, like, he's able to, like, kind of, because it like gives you a power boost, but it also is like taking over you, and it kind of gives him like his power back from his younger days. So he's able to like, I'm big and strong again, and he's using that because he's kind of able to stay in his right mind to fight against the virus, and he's able to then he starts fighting against the Mimori-gumi that are like the samurai, not the ninjas, but like the samurai forces that were working for Orochi. Hi, Brenda. Yes, you're a good girl. And what ends up happening is Hyougoro basically said, it's like if the infection worsens for himself, he ordered Yatape to end his life before he could completely transform into an Ice Oni. And it gets to that point where it's, Hyougoro and so many of the others, like, Marco's flames helped with fighting against the Ice Oni virus and everything. But what ends up happening is, of course, it's starting to spread more, and it's getting worse and worse and worse, and it's getting harder to fight. And then we have, Chopper is able to show up, and, well, we have the very tense moment where Yatape is having to get ready to, end Hyougoro, and the other, one of the other Yakuza members is having to get ready to end Amasa, and that's when Chopper shows up and he stops this, and he, administers Secure to Hyougoro, and he activates, the antidote to spread, aerolizes the antidote to then, cure everybody of the Ice Oni virus and everything. So that works great. And Hyougoro turns back to his little old man's form again. But like they're all relieved because like they didn't want to end Hyougoro in that way. They didn't want to have to end him in that regard, have him go out in that state. And I understand that entirely. And they they do that. Chopper heals all of them, and then Hyougoro gets a pretty good front seat view as Chopper jumps up and then like slaps Queen in his monster point form for exclaiming that he's not a Tanuki, and he's like, oh, sorry, because Hyougoro kind of like he'd been referring to him as like Mr. Tanuki a whole bunch, and he's like, oh, sorry about that. So he's like he apologizes for that, I think, later on. And then later we cut through other parts of the battle. Don't see that much of Hyougoro during this time frame. And eventually during the battle with Kaido on the roof, and Luffy is defeated at that point in time, and that the Scabbards had lost and everything, and Kaido has the announcement that Luffy has lost and that the Scabbards have been defeated and everything, and Hyougoro is very worried about this. And then we have it that, Momonosuke takes over on the intercom, and he's able to say that, Luffy isn't dead. Luffy's still going to fight. And, he rallies the Alliance forces and everything. And so that, Hyougoro's probably pretty proud about that. And there's not much else that we get for Hyougoro here. He is there on Onigashima as it's lifted into the sky, as it is burning, as it is falling apart. All of this stuff is going on. Parts of the battles with, like, Queen and King go on. And, Hyougoro gets to see some of that stuff with, like, Sanji and Zoro and things like that. And, like, Perospero showing up. And, like, Big Mom a little bit. And, it's, like, all this other stuff. So it's, like, he's getting to see some of this stuff, but he's not really involved in it. The main one that we see kind of with him being involved in is when he and Kawamatsu are discussing Zoro, because, like, they're seeing Zoro fight, and they compare him to the Shimosuke family, specifically to Ushimaru and to Ryuma. So they're making that comparison there. And then, of course, they have it that when the gigantic dragon that they initially think is Kaido, then it's like, wait, no, that's a pink dragon, that's a peach dragon, that can't be Kaido, that it's Momonosuke, comes, flying through and everything. And flying through the performance hall with Luffy hanging on one horn was just like, oh my god. And then there is, of course, later on, there is other bits of the battle that are going on. And of course, there's, like, the hole in the ceiling. And so it's like they're able to kind of look up and see flashes of the battle between Luffy and Kaido. And then eventually, I think Hyougoro is awake when Luffy's head pops through when he's in Gear 5th form, so that's fun. I think he sees that, along with everybody else, the, oh my god, eye-popping moment that happens there. And, he's there when the raid finally ends. And, of course, basically what ends up happening, leading into the end is, they start celebrating because Kaido has been defeated. He's been dropped into a volcano. Big Mom's been defeated, dropped into the same volcano. And, like, Orochi is defeated. And they're just like, yay. And, like, the island has been landed safely by Momonosuke and everything. I don't know how much of a danger they knew they were in at that point in time beyond, like, the fire all around them. But still, Hyougoro is kind of just, like, off to the side watching as a lot of that stuff happens. Not that he's not involved in the fight, because, like, a lot of, him and the samurai and the other Yakuza members are very much involved in trying to take out a bunch of the waiters and the pleasures and some of the lower ranked gifters, along with some of the other members from, like, Orochi's former groups. Hyougoro is part of, like, leading that group and, like, watching through the ceiling as, like, the battle is going on with Luffy and Kaido. And, of course, just the relief on him when Luffy is the winner, when Kaido is defeated. And just, like, the relief that must go through him, along with, it's the same relief that goes through so many, but all the others that are there that are part of the raid on Onigashima. It's just, like, Kaido was defeated. God, it's like they're just so relieved, and that is so understandable given everything that their country has been through. And then eventually, after the raid, then they have the huge party to celebrate the liberation of Wano. And of course, Hyougoro is there, seen, he's partying alongside the rest of the Yakuza and everything. Probably not as, like, up to his old drinking habits and everything as it used to be, but probably still pretty damn, having a pretty good damn time. And this is one of the goodbyes we don't see in the manga, and it's not in the anime. I wish there had been a goodbye scene between Luffy and Hyougoro, just because, like, Hyougoro just, like, he very much kind of took on that mentor role for Luffy at that point in time, and that's very appreciative of him. And, so it would have been nice to see Luffy and Hyougoro, or at least, like, have a scene or something during the celebration. Have, like, Luffy and Hyougoro, drinking together or something, or having them sharing a bunch of dongos or something like that. That would have been, like, a nice thing to have seen, even if it was just something that they added in the episode. during the festivals. During the big festival. That would have been nice. But that's okay. We don't get that. And then of course, but like you would assume there would be something there where like hopefully Luffy said goodbye to him. But then we cut into the Yamato's cover story pages, where we have seen Hyougoro. He is currently in the flower capital, and he is with Nekomamushi, because we see Nekomamushi and him just like hanging out. And that's why I think Nekomamushi is going to become like kind of maybe like one of the new heads of the Yakuza, because like I don't think Hyougoro is up to it, but given that the Yakuza and Wano seem to have a much better relationship, and like they were on Momonosuke's side, and Momonosuke is the new shogun, and like having the Yakuza connected to them by having Nekomamushi as the new head of the Yakuza within the flower capital, and setting up good communication networks with the other heads of the Yakuza from the other regions. And I'll talk about this a little bit more in their video, obviously. But like given that possibility, that would be a nice way of doing it. And have like Hyougoro there kind of like as an advisor. Because like, yeah, we have Yamato like visits Hyougoro and Nekomamushi before he heads off. And we have not seen Hyougoro yet. And I mean like, Hyougoro is younger than Garp. So, and he's not that much older than Big Mom. But like, he's younger than Garp. And it would be interesting. I was like, it would be interesting to have Hyougoro and Garp meet. That would be a very interesting thing there. Because, like, Hyougoro is just so proud of Luffy for what Luffy has done for, like, helping free Wano. And then Garp is, like, he's like, my grandson should have been a Marine. And Hyougoro just be like, why are you angry at your grandson? He's done amazing things, and he's helped so many people. Garp, yeah, but he's a wanted man all over the world, and now he's an emperor of the pirates. This is not good. And just like Hyougoro just like looking at him like, are we talking about the same boy? Are we talking about the same young man? It's like just seeing Garp and Hyougoro talk, or like Hyougoro and Rayleigh meet. That would be fun too. That would be a fun thing. That would just okay. I know this won't happen, but I kind of want it to happen now. It's like big final war of One Piece. Garp somehow is there. Rayleigh is somehow there, and Hyougoro is somehow there, and it's all of them meeting, and they all get to talk about Luffy. That would be funny. I would love that. That would be really great, because it's like all of these guys that have slightly different perceptions of Luffy, because like Garp sees Luffy as his grandson, wholly, and he loves Luffy, he does, but he doesn't quite see all the good that Luffy has done as a pirate. Rayleigh has seen some of this, and Rayleigh sees flashes of Roger in Luffy. Not the reincarnated version, but like the inherited will. And Hyougoro is seeing some of that there as well, but he's seeing it because it's similar to Odin, is what he's seeing there. So it's like Luffy is not a reincarnation of Joy Boy or of Roger or of Odin. None of that stuff. He is his own whole self, but he has like their inherited will. And there even is a little bit of like the inherited will of Garp there in Luffy as well, with like Garp's justice is my justice, and Luffy's justice is kind of the same way. It's just a little bit different than Garp's justice. But yeah, that would be fun to see like Hyougoro and Rayleigh and Garp all meet, and just like throw Crocus in there too. Just a bunch of old men. Boodle, have a bunch of the old guys all hang out. Have them all have a card game on Friday nights. That would be funny. So Goku can join them. That would be funny. And if Vegapunk was still alive, he could join too. But we could like throw that in there. That would be fun. But like, yeah, that's the most current thing that we have for Hyougoro is, just a little bit in the Yamato's cover story. In regards to some of the trivia about Hyougoro, and this is the last bit. So Hyougoro's appearance from 20 years ago, from his younger years, is based off of the two wrathful guardians at the entrance to Buddhist temples. And I am going to butcher this, and I apologize. The Kongori Kishi. And the Fudo Mayu, a guardian deity primarily revered in the Vajrayana Buddhism. Sorry. So he's kind of, his appearance is kind of based off of those. And they are also kind of representations of like the Wisdom King. So there's also like that connection back there between like Hyougoro and Luffy. Because, his Gear 4th is kind of, has similarities to the Wisdom King. Also, Hyougoro just makes these very intense facial expressions, which is what you see a lot in the Wisdom King stuff, which is kind of funny. So, that's what I have for this for Hyougoro. As I said, the next one will be about the other 4 Yakuza, and then I'll be going into the Scabbards, which will be fun and long, because some of them will have 2, if not 3 videos. The 3 videos is mostly in the case of Kinemon, because he's in so much in the post time skip. So that's what we have. I thank you for watching, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye!